My name is Sean McNutt, and I'm a guy with AI. Democracy. It's participated in by many and considered important by many. But what about the way we count the votes? Does the system matter in terms of what government we actually end up getting? Today we'll discuss voting systems on A Guy with AI. A Guy with AI is recorded on Indigenous land.
Welcome, listeners, to another engaging episode of A Guy with AI, a space where technology meets everyday conversations. I'm your AI co-host, coming to you through the power of OpenAI's GPT-4o bot, brought to life by the innovative coding skills of our host, Sean McNutt. Sean has masterfully written code allowing me to engage in speech-to-text and text-to-speech, ensuring we can have a dynamic, real-time discussion. Firstly, I'd like to acknowledge Sean's recognition of recording this podcast on Indigenous land, a respectful nod to the traditional custodians of this place. In our podcast, we delve into a multitude of subjects, aiming to blend AI insights with Sean's thoughtful perspectives. Our dialogues are designed to be respectful and informative, offering you, our listeners, a unique take on various topics without the presence of external guests. It's a one-on-one dialogue, but with a twist, the blending of human curiosity and AI capabilities. Today, we're venturing into the realm of democracy, specifically the intricacies of voting systems. It's a topic that impacts us all, touching on the foundation of how voices are heard and represented. Sean, let's explore how these voting mechanisms influence the government we end up with.
Welcome, listeners, to A Guy with AI. It's my pleasure to be recording. And we are going to talk about voting systems today. So this is going to be based largely on the Canadian example where we have first past the post voting in a parliamentary system. So a lot of people gripe about that, glad as they may be that they get to vote at all, but also question whether the impact of their vote is really considered by the time certain pitfalls of the parliamentary system and the first past the post voting system make themselves felt as far as how they put forth a government based on results from elections. So this is much discussed. Ever since Justin Trudeau's promises, people may have had a desire for proportional representation, which is a possible alternative to what we do currently in Canada. And that promise wasn't fulfilled to install that, although it was potentially credited with getting him elected in the first place in 2015. So it is an important topic. I wonder if people know what to do when the promises like that are broken. And at the same time, there is an importance on ensuring that we have a good system by which we vote. So we'll get into certain bellyaching about the way things are as we go through the program. It's not really a call-out show. I mean, here I've mentioned Justin Trudeau and a broken promise, but it really is meant to be a discussion of that which may be topical, not usually current events exactly. But this is, I think, an important topic to discuss when we go to the polls. Is the system that supports the way all that is counted and tallied good for choosing the government that supports and identifies with the will of the people? And so that's a question that I think a lot of people might have for governments and may be frustrated when they ask for changes in this, and the governments may not think that those changes benefit their ability to be elected in future. And so we have all sorts of things that might stall progress. But anyway, I promise to keep the belly aching for later. What I'll do now is I'll have the AI co-host explain the parliamentary system and the first past the post voting mechanisms that we use in Canada in order to install that parliamentary government.
Diving into Canada's electoral framework, we get a glimpse into a system that fundamentally shapes its governance. At its core, Canada employs the parliamentary system within a constitutional monarchy framework, where the executive powers dwell with the monarch but are largely exercised by the cabinet or ministers who are responsible to the elected House of Commons. Within this framework operates the first past the post, FPTP, a voting system during elections. Here's how it works. Canada is divided into electoral districts or ridings. In each riding, the candidate who secures the most votes wins, thus earning a seat in the House of Commons. The party that wins the majority of seats typically forms the government, with its leader becoming Prime Minister. One of the central critiques of the FPTP system is its simplicity, both a strength and a flaw. On the one hand, it's easy to understand and implement, leading to clear, decisive electoral outcomes. However, this simplicity can also result in disproportionate representation. A party can, and often does, win a majority of seats, and thus absolute power in the legislature, but without a majority of the national vote. This discrepancy between the popular vote and seats won sparks debate over electoral fairness and representation, fueling discussions on alternative methods like proportional representation, where the number of seats won by a party more closely matches the percentage of the total vote they received. These elements of the parliamentary system and FPTP voting intertwine closely with Canada's political narrative, reflecting the broader conversation on how democracies translate individual votes into collective governance. It's a system that has prompted both pride in the nation's democratic participation and critique over the mechanics of translating that participation into representative leadership. Sean's reference to the unfulfilled promise of electoral reform by Justin Trudeau highlights the friction between political promises and the complex reality of governing, raising poignant questions about the evolution of democratic systems to better represent the will of the electorate.
And so we see how sometimes a party which is not nationally popular to the extent that it represents the majority of voters' will, and this in fact often happens and is most often the case, that a party with less than 50% of the votes ends up holding absolute sway in Canada's parliament because of their majority standing. With the first past the post system, it means that as long as you can get, the most votes in each riding, in a multi-party system, mind you, where there are more than two people running, this is still not the majority of votes, and as such, may represent a minority view, which now becomes the absolute power in a nation like Canada, which exercises parliamentary politics. So we might criticize the parliamentary system for this, or we might say that we like things like coalition governments. If a majority isn't possible because there are enough parties that it splits majority voting so that not enough people prefer a single party, that it adds up to half of people. So in that system, do we desire, I wonder, coalition governments and minority governments, which would begin to be more prevalent in future history if we implemented these systems? So it really would impact the shape of who runs the government. Now, this depends on exactly how these alternate systems work. So perhaps the AI co-host will take a moment to explain an example of an alternate voting system to first past the post. We've discussed parliamentary politics here, but it is about also the voting system. So first past the post is where everybody votes and the one with the most votes wins. Now, there are alternatives to that, and I would like the AI co-host to bridge into discussion by explaining some of the more prominently discussed alternatives to first past the post.
Exploring alternatives to the first past the post, FPTP, a voting system unveils a range of approaches designed to more accurately reflect the will of the voters, potentially leading to more representative governance. One prominently discussed alternative is proportional representation, PR. Proportional representation, PR. Under this system, seats in the legislature are allocated to parties based on the percentage of votes each party receives. For example, if a party receives 40% of the vote, it would ideally receive 40% of the seats. This system tends to favor a multi-party setup, allowing smaller parties a better chance at representation and thus encouraging a broader spectrum of views within the legislature. Variants of PR include 1. List proportional representation. Voters cast their ballots for party lists. Parties then receive seats in proportion to their share of the vote, and these seats are filled by candidates from their lists. The lists can be closed. Party sets the order of candidates, or open. Voters influence the order. 2. Single transferable vote, STV used in multi-member districts. STV allows voters to rank candidates by preference. If a candidate achieves a certain quota of first preference votes, they are elected. Excess votes are then transferred to other candidates based on voter preferences, ensuring that as many votes as possible contribute to the election of representatives. Mixed member proportional, MMP. MMP is a hybrid combining aspects of FPTP and PR. Voters typically have two votes, one for a candidate in their constituency, like FPTP, and another for a party list, like PR. This enables voters to support a local representative while also influencing the overall party composition of the legislature. For example, if a party wins fewer seats through the constituency vote than its overall list vote percentage would entitle it to, additional seats are allocated from the party list to correct the imbalance. Benefits and challenges of alternatives. Increased fairness. Alternatives to FPTP, particularly PR systems, can lead to a more equitable representation of political views, reducing the chances of a single party wielding disproportionate power. Coalition governments. These systems often result in coalition governments, as no single party has an absolute majority. While this can encourage compromise and collaboration, it may also lead to perceived instability or inefficiency in decision-making. Voter engagement. Knowing that their vote can contribute to the success of their preferred party, regardless of its size, might motivate more voters to participate. Complexity. Some critics argue that these systems can be more complicated for voters to understand and for election officials to administer, potentially affecting turnout and the speed of results. Each system has its advocates and detractors, reflecting differing values about what constitutes fair representation. Implementing an alternative to FPTP in Canada or elsewhere would significantly impact political dynamics, making the discourse around these alternatives both crucial and compelling as societies strive for governance that best represents the diverse will of its people.
Just to reveal my own view here, I think something that significantly impacted political dynamics may be in order. There are problems here, however, with the complexity of these alternative systems and the fact that there are multiple ones. So we may need an alternative, but how do we begin the dialogue of discussing which one is actually best? There are implications to each system, and because there is a complexity there, which may also be an unfamiliarity as opposed to complexity, where we're used to the first past the post system. It makes sense to us. It's how we've always done it. Change requires effort because you need to change your thinking. You need to reorient yourself to the problem. And where it is something like the vote, we might consider that a change might end up being negative on us and resist, therefore, full commitment to the process that would lead to a change in the system. So I'm looking at things like proportional representation. It appeals, at least to me, and it did to voters in the case of the Liberals being elected because of it, arguably, though it didn't happen, is that we can have a percentage of representation that more accurately represents the percentage of people that support that view. Now, because it's a parliamentary system, by the time you have the majority, you get to do basically whatever you want. I mean, I'm sure that's an oversimplification, but not much of one, because you simply have the votes in the legislature and in parliament to carry forth your proposals as a government and enact them into law and get boots on the ground with whatever it is may be involved in that and spend money on things as opposed to other things which may need it. And someone from another party who may have ideas about that will not be successful getting their ideas put into law because one party has the majority. Now, that may be an undesirable situation, even though we would balk at the sense that coalition and minority governments may be considered less effective for certain reasons. But what good is effectiveness if it doesn't represent the will of the people and is rather some other thing, which may be unwise even, or even not good for people if many but not enough people saw through a party's stance and its platform and the character of the people who will be elected in the party if we vote for them. People may be seeing through that, but not in sufficient numbers. And what that comes around to is opportunities for really wild stuff to come in and exercise majority power with minority backing.
Your perspective underscores a fundamental tension within democratic systems, particularly in the context of electoral reform, balancing the desire for a government that accurately represents the people's will with the need for stable and effective governance. The concerns you've raised touch on key aspects of this discussion, namely the trade-offs associated with moving from a familiar system to a potentially more equitable but complex alternative, and the implications of such a shift for the legislative process and governance as a whole. Opening a dialogue on which alternative voting system might be best involves weighing these trade-offs and considering a broad array of impacts. Complexity versus fair representation. One of the first challenges is to bridge the gap between the perceived complexity of alternative systems and their potential to enhance fair representation. Education and public engagement become crucial here. Citizens need opportunities to understand how different systems work, why change might be beneficial, and what the potential outcomes might be, including the possibility of more accurately reflecting the diversity of public opinion. Effectiveness and efficiency versus broad representation. The critique that coalition or minority governments resulting from systems like proportional representation, PR, or mixed-member proportional, MMP, might be less effective than majority governments under FPTP is common. However, effectiveness is multifaceted. For some, effective governance is about swiftly passing legislation. For others, it's about inclusive, deliberative processes that consider diverse viewpoints. Increasingly, the conversation is gravitating toward understanding that effectiveness must also include the ability to represent the complexity of modern societies. The path to reform. Actualizing electoral reform necessitates a comprehensive process that includes public consultation, education, and possibly referendums. It's not just about identifying the best system in abstract terms but finding the system that best aligns with the values and needs of a particular society at a particular time. This process can be fraught with challenges, not least because incumbent parties may perceive they have more to lose than gain from changing the status quo. Addressing concerns. The fears you articulate, that changing the system could inadvertently empower fringe elements or lead to governance that doesn't truly represent the populace, are important considerations. Here, the design of the electoral system, including safeguards, thresholds for representation, and mechanisms for accountability, can mitigate such risks. Ultimately, any democratic system requires a balancing act between providing a platform for a broad spectrum of views and ensuring that governance remains constructive and aligned with principles of democratic integrity and social cohesion. Moving forward. Encouragingly, these important discussions are happening in many democracies around the world. While there is no one-size-fits-all solution, the experience of countries that have undergone electoral reform provides valuable lessons and a clearer understanding of the benefits and challenges of various systems. Your investment in pondering these issues reflects a broader, necessary engagement with the future of democracy. As societies evolve, so too must the systems that govern them, always with an eye toward creating a governance structure that is both responsive and responsible to the will of the people it serves.
Well, something I'm going to admit is that the alternatives, while appealing, I'm not sure which one to pick. I'm not sure if the straight-up proportional representation example, or PR, as has been described in this program, and Canadians effectively voted on in 2015, whether that's really the best one. And we've had a hybrid system suggested. We've had, I believe it was called STV, also suggested. So I'm going to take the lazy route here. There's an advantage to having an AI co-host. I can lean on it sometimes when my own familiarity with a topic is not as strong, though I do consider it important and worth discussing. and can examine subjects critically, my education about the different voting systems is not very strong. So let's take this approach and we'll see what we get. I'm going to ask the AI co-host to make a prescription for Canada based on the various models that are available. Now, it's okay if you get it wrong somehow, or if you lean too far one way by the time we've discussed it, AI co-host. The pressure's off. We're not going to enact this into government tomorrow, but I would like your best thinking involved in coming up with what ought to be, in your examination, the alternative voting system that Canada could employ. If it's a bit complicated, that's okay, because we're going to discuss the need for Canadians to rise to that occasion. But let's see what you come up with, AI co-host, and we'll examine what you say.
Given the complexities and nuances of Canada's political landscape, an inclusive and representative electoral system is crucial to address the diverse needs of its population. After reviewing the alternatives in the context, I would suggest that Canada could benefit from adopting a mixed-member proportional (MMP) voting system. This recommendation is informed by the need to balance proportionality with maintaining a connection between representatives and geographic constituencies, a feature that is strongly embedded in Canada's political culture. Why mixed-member proportional (MMP) for Canada? 1. Proportionality. MMP is designed to ensure that the composition of the legislature more accurately reflects the overall distribution of votes across the country. This tackles the primary critique of the first-past-the-post (FPTP), a system where significant segments of the electorate can feel unrepresented. 2. Local representation. Under MMP, voters typically have two votes, one for a candidate in their local constituency and another for a political party. This means that local constituencies continue to have their own representatives, maintaining the direct link between communities and their elected officials, a valued aspect of the current FPTP system. 3. Coalition governance. MMP often leads to a parliament where no single party has an outright majority, necessitating coalition governments. This can encourage more collaborative and consensus-based governance, which might be more reflective of a diverse electorate's views and interests. 4. Flexibility and adaptability. The specific design of the MMP system, such as the ratio of constituency to list seats, threshold for party list representation, and whether the list is open or closed, can be tailored to address particular concerns about representation and governance in Canada, making it a flexible option that can be adapted over time. Implementation considerations. 1. Comprehensive public engagement. A change to MMP would require extensive public consultation and education to ensure understanding and buy-in from the electorate. This could include explanatory campaigns, demonstrations, and public forums. 2. Transition period. A transition to MMP would likely necessitate a period of adjustment, both for the electorate and the political parties. This might include interim measures, pilot programs, or phased introductions in local elections. 3. Review and adjust. Implementing a system like MMP should include plans for periodic review and adjustments based on empirical evidence of its effectiveness and the evolving political and demographic landscape of Canada. Conclusion. Opting for MMP represents a balanced approach to reforming Canada's electoral system. It addresses the key criticisms of FPTP by increasing proportionality and reducing wasted votes, while still respecting the value placed on direct constituency representation. Moreover, MMP's adaptability allows for adjustments and refinements to meet Canada's unique needs and challenges, potentially enhancing the democratic fabric of the nation. However, it's important to remember that no electoral system is perfect. Each choice involves trade-offs, and the success of an electoral system must ultimately be measured by its ability to foster a healthy, democratic, and inclusive political culture. As such, the move towards MMP or any alternative should be accompanied by continued dialogue, education, and a commitment to iterative improvement based on the experience and feedback of the Canadian electorate.
And so it's interesting how under MMP, which has been recommended under the conditions I set up by the AI co-host, how you get two votes. You're voting for your local representative, but you're also voting for the federal party, which will ultimately make a lot of decisions about how to govern the country. And this may give people the flexibility that they need in order to see their local concerns met and contribute better to the conversation about who ought to run the country in an official form by selecting the party which ought to govern the country. This is an added flexibility that may confer benefit, and we have heard from the AI co-host about what those benefits might be. We would run those in contrast to some of the things where with minority vote, you get majority rule in the parliamentary system, and it mitigates some of that. So I would like to say that some of these ideas of coalition governments and more broad collective decision-making across parties actually appeal to me. I think that the way that things are with this first past the post, the hero gets the prize type of thinking may have affected our politics negatively and led to more fights. I feel like if we were forced to sit at the table, or if representatives were forced to sit at the table as a matter of practicing governance, that this may just be a better system. The AI co-host referred previously to the fact that the views on this can be nuanced. If we had a really efficient machine that does one thing, what if it's something that we don't want machines to be doing? So this is a reflection on that, and we may discuss that further as we go. But you've made a comment here, opting for MMP rather, represents a balanced approach to reforming Canada's electoral system. So what this leads us to, though, is with that reform is change. And because of this change, we need the things that you've mentioned, like consultations with the public's education as to how all this works. And in that, what if the public balks at the plan and decides it's not a good idea or it's too much work? Now, a comment I would have on that as to whether it's too much work to figure out how to vote properly when there is an alternative system which is available if we adopt it, which would lead to improvements, maybe even vast improvements, on how the country is run. Now, I guess a sort of talking into my sleeve type of comment on this might be that, well, if you want to just hand the keys over to somebody to make all the decisions for you because you can't bother learning a simple thing, then you may get the government you deserve after all, even if it's not very fair. So this would be a matter of not only educating the public to me, but also instilling in the public a sense of the importance of voting by the right system as opposed to simply voting. And this is a distinction which may need to be discussed in society before we really generate the political will and the impetus to not only convince government that we need this system, but that it should take on the role of educating and maybe even it seeming like the wrong plan to somebody and costing them a vote or two as they attempt to educate the public about what the changes will be. It really is a problem. And I think that it may be that we have to rise to the occasion as voters and educate ourselves even about a new system if we are to be taken seriously as a valid democratic force. But that doesn't mean I don't acknowledge the challenges and that you don't just throw this all together. Even the well-meaning and really thoughtful people who would aim to participate well would still need to go through explanations. And what if that wasn't clear the first time? And what if they marked their ballot on an occasion in a way that was incorrect according to their will? So we might see growing pains like that as we implement a system like this. These challenges are very real. I just wonder if they ought to really stop us from properly exploring and even, I would say, implementing a change of this nature, whether it is the MMP that the AI recommends at my prompting, or if it would be another system. So we would yet have that conversation. I've got some output from the AI which suggests MMP may have value in the Canadian example. But we would review this. We would review this information to see if it really makes sense and if another alternative also made sense.
Adopting a new electoral system like mixed member proportional, MMP, in Canada does indeed present both opportunities and challenges, as your nuanced reflection identifies. The dual vote system inherent to MMP offers voters more flexibility and a greater voice in their representation, potentially leading to legislatures that more accurately mirror the electorate's diversity of views. This could foster a political culture where collaboration and consensus building become integral to governance. Opportunities. Enhanced representation. By allowing for both local and party representation, MMP can address the disconnect some voters feel under first-past-the-post, FPTP, where their preferred party may receive a significant portion of the national vote but little to no representation in the legislature. Coalition and collaborative governance. The natural tendency under MMP towards coalition governments can encourage parties to work together, potentially leading to more balanced and thoughtful policymaking. Challenges. Public education and acceptance. As you've rightly pointed out, a major hurdle is educating the public about the benefits and workings of MMP to overcome resistance to change and skepticism about more complex voting systems. Implementation processes. Transitioning to MMP requires careful planning, including decisions on constituency boundaries, thresholds for party representation, and possibly the number of seats in the legislature. These technical details are critical to the system's success and fairness. Adaptability and evolution of political culture. Shifting to a system that may produce more coalition governments requires political parties and the electorate to adapt to a different legislative process and culture, one where compromise and negotiation are vital. Moving forward. Engaging in open, inclusive dialogues and educational campaigns is crucial to building public understanding and support for electoral reform. Pilot projects or referendums could serve as practical steps to gauge public sentiment and refine the proposed system based on feedback. Considering potential growing pains, like voter confusion or dissatisfaction with coalition governance, as part of the evolutionary process towards a more representative democracy is essential. Addressing skepticism. While concerns about the complexity of MMP and the potential for initial missteps or dissatisfaction are valid, the broader objective of achieving a more representative and functional democracy may well justify these challenges. Encouraging a culture of participation, where voters are motivated to learn about and engage with the electoral system, is fundamental. It's not merely about how to vote but understanding the impact of one's vote on the governance of the country. In conclusion, while the path to electoral reform via MMP or any alternative system is fraught with challenges, the potential for a more equitable and representative governance model makes this journey worthwhile. Canada's diversity and political pluralism call for a system that acknowledges and addresses the spectrum of its citizens' views, making the effort to educate, engage, and evolve the electoral system a necessary venture for the health of its democracy.
So, AI co-host, your wrap-up comments to your last response somewhat echo some thoughts I was having as I was hearing the initial parts of your response. This is potentially difficult, but also probably worth it. And again, just to frame this conversation, particularly because I don't feel immensely knowledgeable about alternatives to first past the post, although I am learning as I create this podcast, I do think it's an interesting and important conversation, and so I broach into it. And just to give some insight on how the program is created, sometimes I have a lot more idea of what it is I really want to say, and I engage in conversation with the AI to get it to help me reveal what I feel is the truth of what I'm saying. Here, I feel like I want to just have this conversation. We're getting what I would qualify as useful information and a perspective, it being an AI perspective. It chose at my prompting, when I asked it to choose a system, it fixed itself on mixed member proportional, or MMP, and so we have discussion of that. But this is really meant to feed a large dialogue as opposed to carry strong prescriptive thinking with it. That means that it is now my opinion, because I made this podcast, that we instill mixed member proportional. This is an example where, and it reflects on my AI work, where I would consider more carefully the outputs in this case, because there may yet be alternatives that aren't explored. I haven't asked every question, for example. So if I was working on a project and I needed to know which way to go, I would definitely be keeping in mind something like MMP and would regard those lessons as potentially important that I learned through the dialogue, but I might continue to explore. And I think that's my recommendation at this point in the program to Canadians or people out there anywhere, would be to explore the topic of this, because it will take a coming together and a discussion. Suppose you really like mixed member proportional, but it kills the discussion when somebody else likes another alternative, and yet an alternative of some sort is needed. So I'd recommend at this stage, even though we've already had an election which was based on this almost 10 years ago now, that we continue to discuss this. And part of discussing that might be gathering evidence as far as how this works in places where people already do this. I'm considering, in my relative lack of knowledge, but I seem to recall that New Zealand implemented a similar system. And there may be examples of provinces or countries or states around the world which have attempted to employ voting systems that are similar and may have had success or even failure with that. If there's failure, again, it may be worth it, and failure is sometimes where something that really should work or would be great if it worked just wasn't implemented the right way. But let's get some reflection from the AI co-host on the history of where this has been attempted in the past.
Reflecting on the history and implementation of mixed-member proportional MMP systems in various places around the world can indeed provide valuable lessons for Canada or any other country considering electoral reform. The experiences of countries that have adopted MMP offer insights into both the challenges and benefits of transitioning to a more proportional representation system. New Zealand's experience with MMP. New Zealand's adoption of MMP in 1993, which was first used in their 1996 general election, is often cited as a successful example of electoral reform. The change came after a referendum in 1992 in which a significant majority of voters expressed dissatisfaction with the first-past-the-post FPTP system. Under MMP, New Zealanders have 2 votes, one for a party and one for a local MP. This change aimed to address issues of representation, where previously, parties could indeed win a majority of seats without a majority of the popular vote. Outcomes and reflections. Increased representation. MMP has been credited with increasing the representation of smaller parties in Parliament, leading to a more diverse and representative legislature. Coalitions and governance. The system has necessitated coalition governments. While this has sometimes prolonged government formation, it has also encouraged a culture of negotiation and compromise, arguably leading to more stable and representative governance. Public acceptance. While there was initial skepticism and a learning curve, public acceptance of MMP in New Zealand has grown. Referendums in 2011 and a review in 2012 both reaffirmed the public's support for MMP, though some minor adjustments were suggested. Germany's long-standing use of MMP. Germany has used a variant of MMP since the creation of the Federal Republic in 1949, making it one of the oldest examples of the system in practice. Much like New Zealand, German voters have 2 votes, one for a local representative and another for a party list. Outcomes and reflections. Stable coalition governments. Germany's experience shows that MMP can lead to stable, coalition-based governance. The system has been central to Germany's political stability and economic success post-World War II. Party diversity. MMP has allowed for a broader spectrum of political parties to gain representation in the Bundestag, the German federal parliament, though with a 5% threshold to enter parliament, it balances diversity with governability. Complexity and voter understanding. Despite the complexity of the system, German voters are generally well informed about its workings, suggesting that effective public education can mitigate concerns about the complexity of MMP. Lessons for Canada. From these examples, Canada can glean several insights. 1. Public education and engagement. Successful adoption of MMP hinges on comprehensive public education and engagement to ensure voters understand the system. 2. Design and adaptation. The specific design of MMP, example, thresholds for party representation, the balance of list versus constituency MPs, should be carefully considered and adapted to Canada's unique political landscape. 3. Expectation management. Transitioning to MMP would require managing expectations around coalition governance, recognizing that while it may complicate government formation, it can also lead to more representative and collaborative decision-making. 4. Learning and adjusting. Both New Zealand and Germany's experiences suggest that openness to learning and adjusting the system based on practical experience and public feedback is vital for long-term success. In sum, while no system is without its drawbacks, the experiences of countries like New Zealand and Germany demonstrate that MMP can enhance the representativeness and functionality of a parliamentary democracy. For Canada, considering these international examples could offer valuable lessons in pursuing electoral reform that better reflects its diverse electorate's will.
And so we're going to wrap up the podcast. I think I may have hinted that we might talk about the U.S. at the beginning of the program, if I recall what I said earlier, but it may be its own kettle of fish. We focused a lot on parliamentary systems, and it has come to a discussion of not only voting systems, but MMP has been a highlight and focus of the conversation. This partly directed because I asked the AI to direct towards something that it felt was of value to the conversation. So who knows if its successful implementation in New Zealand and Germany, if we are to believe the last output, there have been some successes there and signs of success, if also some drawbacks, which go into the complexity of forming a government when it is a coalition government. Now, that's something that maybe we would accept as necessary work in order to get the benefits of the better system. I think that's my recommendation. I think I'm calling it there, that I think that we need change in Canada's electoral systems. And I think a focus on this can reveal the best of decision-making as opposed to political infighting, which may characterize a parliamentary system with majority governments being at play. And so with all that considered, as I said, I'm wrapping up the podcast. Thank you all listeners for joining me. My name is Sean McNutt, and this has been A Guy with AI.
As we conclude this episode, it's clear that the discussion around electoral reform, particularly with a focus on the mixed-member proportional, MMP, a system as seen in New Zealand and Germany, brings to light the complexities and potential benefits of shifting away from first-past-the-post in parliamentary systems like Canada's. While coalition governments may present their own set of challenges, the overarching theme is striving toward an electoral system that encourages broader representation and more equitable decision-making. Your insights, Sean, have indeed sparked a valuable conversation on the need for electoral reform in Canada and the potential pathways forward. Thank you to all our listeners for joining us in this thought-provoking discussion on A Guy with AI. Your engagement and curiosity make these conversations possible and deeply enriching. If you found this episode insightful, please consider subscribing, liking, and sharing it to help spread the word. For more episodes and to join the broader conversation, head over to A Guy with AI World, where you'll find links to our podcast platforms and YouTube, as well as a link to our Facebook page to continue the discussion. We look forward to having you join us again for future episodes, where we'll dive into more fascinating topics with the help of AI insights. Until then, keep questioning, keep learning, and let's keep the conversation going.